Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today we're looking at PSP's BinAmp. It is a Class A triode amplifier, an emulation. Let's dive in here. So right off the bat, the two big knobs you're going to care about are the character and the drive. The drive is going to control when the clipping starts. So what happens is when you overdrive an amp, it has to do weird stuff about how it's going to deal with when things get too loud. And that's what this drive is. So if we go ahead and dial this up, we see it has to turn down, we get this rounding effect. And this translates to higher harmonics. We're adding harmonics to the signal, and a lot of people equate this to a warmer tone. If we keep going aggressively, it really starts to shove it down, and you get kind of this square shape. But notice it's asymmetrical. This is some of the fanciness of this unit. Now you have over here a character control. So what this does is it controls things about this drive control. So if we have the drive off and you move this, it's not going to do anything. If we move this around, we don't get nothing. So if we bring the drive up though, and then move it, we get these changes. You can see in this case, it's becoming a little more asymmetric. So there's our character, there's our drive. Level's pretty obvious. There is a lot of these knobs are already pretty smart. There will be some adjustments on the output level to try and keep the tones at a consistent level of loudness so you can compare them. But you saw there, we did get quite a bit softer because of the distortion that happened. And so if we want to keep this distortion, we'd want to gain match that so that sounds this similar level of loudness coming in and out. Because ideally, with this, remember, we really have two goals. Our first goal in our case, which is a little weird compared to the old cases, is we want to change the timbre of the sound. That's what we're after. The second goal is to amplify something. So if we could use this to turn something up as a volume control as well, but probably grabbing this to distort something. So in this case, if we were to have a high distortion, bring this up, and then we could bring the level up to try and, match whatever was coming in. And you'd have to do this by ear. Sine wave, fortunately, you can kind of do it visually, but it's not going to work with more complicated waveforms. So, always use your ear. You've got a couple pretty obvious auxiliary controls. A blend control is just like dry, wet. But there are some filters. So you have a high pass filter and a roll off filter. So this will roll off the top end. This will roll off the, it'll high pass it. It'll roll off the low end. Right. Now we've got here a pad and these two polarity buttons. You might be going, why do we need these polarity buttons? Well, you might notice it's asymmetrical, and asymmetry can spell some interesting phase related mixing consequences. Sometimes if you flip the phase, or you flip the polarity, I should say, not flip the phase, it just mixes way better. And we can see this visually here. We've got this asymmetry, so we could flip it on the output. So you see this input output. So one is when it comes in, what's the phase it gets processed with? And then when it gets sent out, what's the phase, that it's going to do? So you could flip it on the way in and flip it again on the way out. You just flip it on the way in, and in different circumstances, this will matter differently. And it's really hard to tell when you're working with a single sound by itself if it's going to make a huge difference. But as soon as you start combining multiple things, you'll know if you care about this or not. Most of the time, you probably won't need to touch this, but there will be sounds where you'll do this and everything will all of a sudden just sort of become a little bit more clearer, and you'll leave it on. That's pretty much what I do with this sort of a thing. I just really quick check it, see if it makes a big difference or not, and move on. So here it is. You can see we can flip it. And also notice, because this one's pre, it has a little bit different of a consequence than the one that's post. So just some interesting options here as far as when you start combining things. And finally, we have a pad. So the pad's really useful because if a sound comes in and is already really loud, then most drive settings are going to squash it. So if you start turning the drive, and granted, we have the most aggressive setting here possible with the drive all the way up. So in that case, you may want to turn down the input signal so that the drive is a little more nuanced. And then what you do is you would turn up the output. But when you actually turn this on, it automatically, BinAmp will turn it down and then turn it up on the output for you. So now we have a little more nuanced control over what's happening during this region. I personally like to work with it off, have the drive low, and you can do much more aggressive things. All right, for our first musical example, I have here a drum bus, and in context, this is what the drums are doing in this track. So that is what the drums sound like. Let's go ahead and toss a BinAmp on there and see if we can't brighten it up a little bit. I'm kind of looking to brighten it up, so I'm not looking at touching the roll-off very much. When I toss one on here, I first kind of wondered to myself, how much mileage am I going to get out of the drive? If I push the drive all the way up with the pad on, you know, that's going to be for like loud signals where I want some more range out of it. And this would be a good example of a case where you might want to do that. So here, for example, I've turned it on. If we hit play, see what's going on. That's minimum drive, maximum drive, and that's with the pad off. We turn it on. We still get some of that drive, but we get a lot more usable range out of this. It's not as affected because it sees a smaller signal. So the point at which it's overdriving the internals of BinAmp happen, you know, less. It just doesn't get over whatever that threshold is. So in this case, I tend to work with the pad off, even though in this case with it on would probably be just as fine too. And remember, this boost is put back at the end. So if you hit this, it'll be gain matched in that way, but you'll still need to use your ears because psychoacoustics and things like that, you're still going to want to use your ears to judge how loud it is. I also intend to bump it up a little bit with BinAmp, but at the beginning, we'll stay a little bit gain matched. So I'm going to actually have this off though, because I like the extra range and the fact that I can just push it into infinity and beyond right here. And what we could do later is bring it down in parallel and then boost the living heck out of it here. And we get this nice squashed layer coming up underneath, which is what I think I actually want to do with this. So I have a kick in here. I really don't want the kick in here, so I'm going to bring the high pass filter up to like 68 or whatever. That'll be fine. Oh, let's bring the drive down. So it's currently out of there. Next order of business, we'll bring the drive up. Hold on, I think it's auto saving. There it goes. Yeah, that's not BinAmp. That's FL Studio saving automatically. So we'll bring up the drive some. Let's use our ears as we do this. So this is pretty aggressive. And we get a lot more sustain and things out of like the high end. They just tend to act more like shh, just the whole way through. There's like no drop off anymore. That's one of the things you get out of this, but also like low end stuff. If we had the kicks in there, you'd hear this crunchy kind of stuff from the low end. And if you want that, that's great. As you push it harder, it's going to get worse. So I'm going to kind of take some of that extra low end stuff out. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring it down halfway, and I'm going to use an external dry wet control. And the reason is, if you use this blend control, this one has the high pass filter built in. And if you actually hover over it, it'll actually tell you like post high pass filter. And if so, I'd like this to bring the kick back in. We have filtered the kick out with this move. So if I want the kick to come back in with that low stuff, because there's still kick, but you know, the low end of the kick, I need to do it here. You don't do it here if you've used the filter. Okay, so we'll bring this in. Yeah, right around there. And we'll give this a bit of a boost. Now, in order to make comparisons, we really should do a before and after level match. So if we turn this off, that's before. So here you can see the verb and everything have been pulled up in the bus because those softer elements now, or the higher elements that contain stuff like that, have been brought up. It's not like a compressor. It's like a crusher. That's how I kind of think of it. Things have been squashed and we're bringing them back up. So in a way, it's kind of like just a super fast compressor. Anyways, we probably want to bring this down if we want to do a bit of a fair comparison, but the whole point I'm using this is to bring it up a little bit as well. So that's the difference right there. So if you're looking for that crushed sound, if you want to sound a little more vintage, right, you'd bring in the roll off a bit. You'd lose a touch of the high end here. And this isn't something I tend to grab unless I want more of a bandpassy type sound. So I'm just going to leave that out of it. So let's go ahead, let's put it in the mix. Let's bring my level back up a little bit to wherever I was before. And just hear how it sounds in the mix as I would properly make the adjustment. Because I would do a small boost here and, you know, bring stuff down later if I have to. So here it is with everything. And we'll do it before. And here's after. If you want more of that crunch sound, you basically just dial the level up. And you get it. But it doesn't have that harsh, super bright texture that you'd get from like a digital clipper or anything like that. That's kind of the angle this has. So let's go ahead and also take a look here at the bass. So I have this bass here. So on the bass, let's go ahead and toss on a BinAmp. And in this case, it's more of just an experiment, see kind of what kind of cool things we can get out of it. So it's already loud, and I have no intention of doing this soft unless it's just totally unusable. If we were to really just punch it, what would happen? This is a case where a character makes a huge difference. Let's bring it back to something reasonable. Let's try out the pattern. I don't think we need the pattern. We'll just move the drive. And let's bring down the blend on this one. That's before. In fact, let's do this. Let's use it as a high pass layer. And then what I like to do with moves like this, because they're interesting, but having them sit statically, I feel like is kind of a waste of their potential. What we could do is we could grab this and we could automate this so that it comes on over time or at specific moments. So like maybe it ramps up here and then it comes back down. You know, we could create more interesting movement with it turning on and off. You know, stuff like that. These sub motions could happen. I wasn't thinking of that in particular with this sound. We might have like these small rises, like high end suddenly comes in. Right, one of these might be a lot more aggressive and comes down right here. You know, and we would go through and sort of fine tune this to the way it is. But that's another thing I like to do with these sorts of plugins. So that is BinAmp. There's two examples. One sort of a more stereotypical way you might use it. You set it and you sort of leave it the way it is. And another one where you kind of move it around and do a little bit more aggressive things with it. If you have any questions about this, feel free to let me know. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.